There is a unique power in a justice that arrives with a velvet touch and a perfectly steady hand at the end. Witness the smooth, calculated paths of those who finally found their peace after a lifetime of hard struggle. Hit subscribe now and see the price of truth. The courtroom smelled like old wood and judgment. I kept my eyes on the wall clock above the jury box 9:14 inches the morning while my brother sat at the plaintiff's table and told 12 strangers that I had stolen the company our father built with his hands. I did not look at him. I did not need to. My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 31 years old, and until 11 months ago, I was a senior contract analyst for the Defense Logistics Agency, a position that, by federal law, I was not permitted to discuss, describe, or confirm to anyone outside a classified briefing, not to friends, not to neighbors, not to the family I had quietly kept afloat for 6 years while they assumed I was doing nothing at all. My brother's name is Daniel. He is 4 years older than me, and has never once, in his entire life, questioned whether he deserved the things he wanted. That confidence, that unearned, bone-deep certainty is what put us both in that courtroom on a Tuesday morning in March. Our father, Raymond Calloway, built Calloway Precision Manufacturing in a rented garage in Dayton, Ohio, in 1987. By the time I was in high school, it employed 63 people and held contracts with 3 regional aerospace companies. By the time my father's hands started shaking at dinner and he stopped finishing his sentences, it was in serious trouble. I was 24 years old. Daniel was 28, already managing the floor, already certain that the business was his inheritance, and his alone. My mother called me on a Thursday evening in October. She said my father had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's and that Daniel had found a buyer for the company, a private equity firm out of Cincinnati, that had offered $2.1 million for the assets. She said Daniel thought it was the right thing to do. She said she thought so too. I drove home that weekend. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and my father's last 3 years of financial statements, and I stayed there until 2 a.m. The company was not dying. It was drowning, but only because someone had stopped bailing water. 2 of its largest contracts had lapsed without renewal. A third had been lost to a competitor for a reason that had nothing to do with quality and everything to do with nobody picking up the phone. I told my father I could fix it. He looked at me across the table with eyes that were already a little uncertain, already beginning that slow retreat. And he said, "Sarah, you work for the government. You push papers. I know people who need what you make," I said. "Let me make some calls." What happened after that is something I am not able to fully explain, even now, because portions of it remain subject to a non-disclosure agreement with the federal government. What I can tell you is this. Within 8 months, Calloway Precision had 2 new defense subcontracts, totaling just over $4.3 million annually. The equity firm's offer was declined. The 63 employees kept their jobs. My father kept his company. I went back to my apartment in Arlington, Virginia. I did not ask for credit. I did not ask for a stake in the company or a seat at any table. I had done it because my father built something worth saving, and because it was the right thing to do. Daniel told everyone I had done nothing, that I had made a few phone calls and gotten lucky, and that the contracts had come through because of relationships he had built over years on the manufacturing floor. He said this so many times, and to so many people, that I think he eventually came to believe it. For 3 years, I said nothing. Then my father died. He passed on a Sunday morning in January, quietly, in the bedroom he had shared with my mother for 38 years. His will had been drafted 18 months earlier, while he could still hold a pen and track a conversation. He left the house to my mother. He left his tools and his truck to Daniel. And he left his controlling interest in Calloway Precision 51% to me. I found out the same way Daniel did, sitting in a lawyer's office in Dayton, listening to a man named Gerald Hooper read from a document in a manila folder, while the afternoon light came through Venetian blinds and cut stripes across the carpet. Daniel did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "That's not right." Gerald Hooper looked at him over his reading glasses and said, "It is the document as written and witnessed, Mr. Calloway." Daniel looked at me. I looked at the stripes on the carpet. He filed suit 11 days later. The complaint alleged that I had exerted undue influence over our father during a period of cognitive decline, and that I had manipulated him into changing his estate documents for my own financial gain. It alleged that I had used my position, whatever they believed that position to be, to insert myself into company business, take credit for work I had not done, and systematically undermine Daniel's standing as the rightful heir to the business. His attorney, a man named Philip Garrett, was the kind of lawyer who wore cufflinks on a Tuesday and smiled like he was doing you a favor. He had built a case around a simple story. I was the absent daughter, the one who left, the one who spent years in Washington doing something vague and unverifiable while Daniel stayed home, worked the floor, and held the family together. It was, I had to admit, a very clean story. The problem with clean stories is that they require the other person to have no story at all. My attorney was a woman named Claire Moss. She was 53, had been practicing law in Ohio for 26 years, and had once, in a case I will not describe in any detail, helped me navigate a situation involving a federal contractor in a county court that should not have had jurisdiction. She knew what I did for a living. She was one of perhaps 4 people outside my agency who did. When I called her after receiving the summons, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much can we put on the table?" "Not much," I said. "Not without calls I'd rather not make." "All right," she said. "Then we let them build their case. And we answer at the right moment." I agreed. It was, professionally speaking, a familiar posture. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that the person who speaks first rarely controls the room. Philip Garrett spent the first day of trial building the absent daughter. He called my mother, who wept softly, and said she had always worried about me, that I had always been the one who kept secrets, who never let anyone in. He called a man named Roy Briggs, who had worked the Calloway floor for 19 years, and who said under oath that he had never once seen me pick up a wrench or speak to a client, or do anything that looked like real work. He called Daniel himself, who sat in the witness box and said, with complete composure, that the company's recovery 3 years ago had been the result of his personal outreach to regional contractors, and that I had attended 2 meetings and taken notes. 2 meetings. And taken notes. I wrote the words on my legal pad and underlined them twice. Then, Philip Garrett called me. I walked to the witness box in a gray blazer and sat down. I folded my hands on the rail. I looked at the jury, 12 people, none of whom I recognized, all of whom were watching me the way you watch someone you've already made up your mind about. Garrett approached with the particular walk of a man who believes the room belongs to him. "Miss Calloway," he said, "can you tell this court what you do for a living?" "I work in federal contract administration," I said. "Federal contract administration," he repeated, as if tasting something unfamiliar. "And who is your employer?" "The Department of Defense." "And in this role, this federal contract administration role, are you based in Ohio?" "No, Arlington, Virginia." "So you live in Virginia. You work in Virginia." He turned slightly toward the jury. "And yet you're asking this court to believe that you, from Virginia, working some desk job in Arlington, somehow saved your father's company?" "I didn't say I saved it," I said. "I said I made some calls." He smiled. It was the smile he'd been waiting to use. "Miss Calloway, I have here a request, submitted through proper legal channels, to your employer, the Department of Defense, asking for your employment records, your performance reviews, and any documentation of your role or responsibilities." He held up a letter. "Do you know what they sent back?" I said nothing. "Nothing," he said. "No records, no confirmation of your title, no verification of your salary, not a single document. For someone who claims to have federal connections powerful enough to secure multi-million-dollar contracts for a small manufacturer in Dayton, Ohio, you are remarkably undocumented." He let that sit for a moment. "Isn't it possible," he continued, "that your father, a man in cognitive decline, who loved his daughter and wanted to see her succeed, simply believed whatever you told him? Isn't it possible that you allowed him to give you credit you didn't earn, and then allowed him to rewrite his will accordingly?" I looked at him for a moment. The room was very quiet. "No," I said. "No," he repeated. "Just no. No explanation. No documentation. No." "You asked if it was possible," I said. I answered the question. He stared at me. I looked at the clock. 2:47 inches the afternoon. Claire Moss did not ask me many questions on redirect. She asked me one. "Miss Calloway," she said, standing at the defense table with her hands flat on the surface, "is there documentation that supports your account of the events of the past 6 years?" "Yes," I said. "And is that documentation available to this court?" "Some of it," I said. "With the appropriate authorization." She nodded once. "Thank you." I stepped down. The next morning, Claire arrived before I did. When I walked into the courtroom at 8:51, she was already at the defense table, and beside her legal pad was a large envelope, the kind used for official government correspondence, thicker than standard, with a seal I recognized immediately. I did not look at it. I sat down and poured water from the pitcher on the table and waited. Philip Garrett began his closing with the same story he had been telling all week. The absent daughter. The desk job nobody could verify. The dying father and the manipulated will. He was good at it, I'll say that. He had a rhythm that made the jury lean in, and he used Daniel's name often, which was smart, because Daniel had a face that read as honest even when his mouth was doing the opposite. When it was Claire's turn, she stood up, straightened one page of notes she would never look at again, and said, Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to submit one additional exhibit. It was authorized for disclosure last night by the Office of General Counsel at the Department of Defense, in response to a formal request filed by this office 3 weeks ago. She picked up the envelope and walked it to the clerk. Philip Garrett was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor, this is... Sit down, Mr. Garrett, the judge said. His name was the Honorable Martin Okafor. He had been on the federal bench for 17 years. He took the envelope from the clerk, looked at the seal on the front, and was quiet for a moment. I watched him. He opened it. He read the first page, then the second. He removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at me. I looked back at him. He said, Miss Moss, I'm going to need a moment. He stood up. The bailiff called, All rise, and the jury rose, and Philip Garrett rose, and Daniel rose, and everyone in that courtroom stood while Judge Okafor walked through the door behind the bench, with my file under his arm. Daniel leaned toward his attorney and said something. Garrett shook his head slightly. I watched them both and said nothing. The judge was gone for 11 minutes. When he came back, he sat down slowly, placed the envelope on the bench, and looked at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, the exhibit just submitted by the defense contains materials that are partially classified under federal statute. I am not able to read them into the record. What I am able to tell you is that I have verified the contents, and that they are authentic and relevant to the matter before this court. He paused. Miss Calloway's federal employment records, including her position, her responsibilities, and her documented involvement in the contract procurement activities at issue in this case, are confirmed by this office. He looked at Philip Garrett. Counsel, I would encourage you to speak with your client during the recess. The jury found in my favor in 4 hours. Philip Garrett did not speak to me afterward. He walked out of the courtroom with his briefcase and his cufflinks and his clean story, which no longer had an ending he could use. Daniel stood near the plaintiff's table for a long time after the verdict was read. I watched him from across the room, his hands at his sides, his jaw tight, the particular stillness of a man who has just discovered that the story he told himself was missing a very important chapter. My mother sat in the gallery and did not look at either of us. I picked up my bag and walked toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. Claire caught up with me in the hallway. You doing okay? She asked. Yes, I said. She looked at me for a moment. He's going to have questions about what was in that envelope. He can submit a FOIA request, I said. She almost smiled. You know that won't give him anything. I know, I said. We walked out into the March afternoon, thin sunlight, cold air, the sound of downtown Dayton doing its ordinary business on a Thursday. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and let the cold work through my blazer. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't use anymore, attached to a name I hadn't spoken in 2 years. I looked at the message for a moment, then put the phone in my pocket. There are things I did in my years at the DLA that I cannot account for in any public forum, in any family conversation, at any dinner table. Contracts that stabilize supply chains for weapon systems I am not permitted to name. Negotiations conducted through intermediaries in buildings, without visible addresses. The quiet work of making sure that the machinery of something very large and very important kept moving without anyone noticing the people who kept it moving. I did not do those things for recognition. I did not do them for my family's understanding, or my brother's respect, or my mother's approval. I did them because I was good at them, and because somebody had to be. But I stayed in that company. I answered my father's call when he needed it. I used what I knew and who I knew to protect something he had built with 63 people's livelihoods attached to it. I did that quietly, and I stepped back, and I let my brother stand in front of it and take the credit and feel like the man he needed to be. I gave him 6 years. I thought that was enough. The week after the verdict, I drove out to the manufacturing facility on the east side of Dayton. It was a Thursday morning, early, and the parking lot was half full, already trucks backed up to the loading dock, the sound of machines coming through the walls. I sat in my rental car for a while, and looked at the building my father had started in a garage. The interim manager, a woman named Donna Price, who had been with the company for 14 years, met me at the front office. She showed me the current contracts, the staffing numbers, the equipment list. She was careful and precise, and clearly nervous about what I would decide. I told her I wasn't going to change anything she was doing. I told her the company would keep operating, and that Daniel would receive a fair buyout for his minority stake, if he wanted one. I told her the 63 employees, 71 now, were not going to lose their jobs. She shook my hand with both of hers. Walking back to my car, I passed the old tool board by the side entrance, the one my father had built himself from pegboard and metal hooks, every tool labeled in his handwriting with a label maker he'd bought in 1994 and refused to replace. The label maker was still there, clipped to the side of the board. I touched the edge of it lightly and kept walking. That evening I drove past the house I grew up in. The porch light was on. I did not stop. Daniel called me 3 weeks later. It was a Sunday, late afternoon, and I was at my desk in Arlington going through contract renewal documentation that had nothing to do with any of this. I let the call go to voicemail. He left a message that was 40 seconds long, and in it he said he was sorry, and that he hadn't understood, and that he wished things had gone differently. I listened to it once. Then I got back to work. There is a version of this story where I march back into that family and demand to be seen clearly, finally, after years of being misread. Where I lay out every classified detail and watch their faces change and say, "This is who I am. This is what I've done, and you never knew." I understand why people want that version. It is satisfying in a way that real life rarely is. But the truth is that being known was never really the point. My father knew or knew enough. He wrote what he wrote, while he still could. And he did it clearly, and he did it right. That is enough. That is more than enough. The company is still running. The people who work there still have their jobs. The contracts I helped secure are still active, renewed quietly, last fall, without any courtroom drama or family audience. My brother got his buyout. He moved to Columbus. I don't know what he tells people when they ask about the company. My mother sends me a text on my birthday. I send one back. And in my desk drawer in Arlington, in a small leather case that stays closed most of the time, there is a pin, a small silver compass rose, issued by the Defense Logistics Agency to senior contract officers upon completion of their service. It is not a dramatic object. It does not look like anything in particular to anyone who doesn't know what it means. I keep it because my father never got to see it. He never got to know the full shape of what I'd been doing all those years, and I used to think that was the sad part of the story. I don't think that anymore. He knew enough. He signed what he signed. He left what he left. The rest was just a matter of paperwork, and paperwork, as it turns out, is something I have always been very good at.